It's great to be here. It's actually my third time in Poland, and I'm excited. I've never been to Gdańsk before. Let's see. I've entitled the talk, AI stands for Alea, Iacta. So Alea Iacta Est was pronounced by Julius Caesar upon crossing the Rubicon. And at that time, he realized that there's no turning back. And we are at that precipice. We are at that juncture. The ship has sailed, and it's never coming back. And if you think that you are waking up to a world that looked the same as last week or last year, you are wrong. There is a war going on outside, and we better be prepared for it. So health records as the source of artificial intelligence assumes that they are an abstract representation. They're a good representation about the ground truths in health and disease. That assumption is flawed because billions of people do not interface with the health system throughout their lives, and therefore, the ground truths about their health and disease are not captured in the ingredients, in the raw materials that we are using to train algorithms on. Data is not an objective representation of the world. It is the representation of the world as seen through the eyes of observers who themselves have implicit biases. My favorite analogy is this of a drunk man who was looking one night for his lost wallet under the lamppost, and a cop approached him. "Sir, is this where you lost your wallet?" And he said, "No, I lost it in the dark, but there's no light there. Why should I look for it there?" Science is what we find under the lamppost. It does not represent the world that's in the dark. And the data that we're using to train AI on is a collection of information that was collected in what we call a non-neutral space. Non-neutral space means that there are powerful forces that affect the effect of treatments that we give to our patients that ultimately influences the outcome of that patient. So these are social determinants of health, political determinants of health, commercial determinants of health. And those are not captured in our electronic health records. We say that those are missing context. And for that reason, we have to be very careful when we're using electronic health records, not just for AI, but also for clinical research. We've seen a lot of papers giving misinformation because there were variables that were not captured in the data set that we use, and spurious associations can learn as a result of that. These are two papers that prove that electronic health records are not accurate representation about the ground truths in health and disease. The first one on the left describes some of the medical devices that are in use, not just in the intensive care units, but across hospitals and clinics around the world. And we point out that each and every one of these medical devices is biased. And why is that? Because these medical devices, these medical equipments, were prototyped and then optimized on a particular demographic, that of a college-age white male in a rich country. We never optimize pulse oximeters among dark-skinned individuals, and for that reason, we know that they don't reflect well the oxygen content of the blood. We never optimize ECGs on large-breasted individuals, and for that reason, we see very small amplitude of the QRS. And how many diagnoses do we miss because of this problem with the medical device? If you're trying to capture brain waves through EEG, the leads that are used to attach to the scalp, they don't stick well if you have a certain kind of hair. And for that reason, there's a lot of artifacts that you see. So what that means in the world of AI, in the world of machine learning, is that a single number may mean different depending on who you are, depending on the color of your skin, depending on your body habitus, depending on the type of hair that you have. And AI will not figure this out. You need to give context to the data before you throw it into an encoder. The paper to the right is even more troubling because here we find that we're not collecting data with the same frequency across patients. And what affects the frequency of collection is not dependent on the disease, on the chronic conditions, on the acute diagnosis. We call this the social determinants of care to be differentiated from the social determinants of health. So this is how we see the patient, how we hear them, how we hear that accent, how we smell them, and it affects the decisions that we make. And for that reason, we collect data differently. In this paper, we demonstrated that for patients who don't speak English well, in our hospital, we tend to do less blood tests. And when you think about it, it makes sense because if it's in the middle of the night and the patient is sound asleep and we need to check serum lactate at 2 a.m., and we have to find an interpreter because you need to explain, why am I waking you up? Why am I sticking your arm with this needle? Sometimes we forgo it because the patient looks peaceful. We're not going to wake him or her up. From a clinical standpoint, of course, we could have missed an increasing serum lactate level, but from a computer science standpoint, from a machine learning standpoint, this is missing data. So for some patients, we collect 10 blood sugars during the day. For some patients, we collect 100 blood sugars during the day. And this is missed by the AI developer because all we do is we aggregate. Give me the minimum, maximum of all the blood sugars taken on each day in the intensive care unit. And of course, everyone assumed that we're collecting blood sugars in the same manner across patients. This is an even more complex area that we need to address, and we call this sampling selection bias. So when we teach machine learning AI to our students, the first is to make them question the training data. You need to know how the training data came about, who collected them, who made it to the database, what equipments and devices were used to measure some physiologic signals there. If you don't understand that, you are committing a grave sin. This is a perfect example of irresponsible AI. If all you're doing is you're collecting data from every hospital, you throw it into an encoder, and then build models that are accurate based on real-world data, you're dooming some patients into poor outcomes. So the first step, and we had a paper that surveyed machine learning courses in the US, and we didn't find one, at that time at least, that will have a module on, let's question the training data. How did this data came about? And I think the reason why that is because most professors do not know how the data came about. So all the students are doing is we're gonna get some data, we're gonna look for something to predict, we're gonna come up with an ensemble model that can predict something with 99% accuracy. That is prime example of the lack of critical thinking. And you're gonna hear that word over and over again, that we need to do this. And I would argue that it's impossible to teach critical thinking, especially with the universities that we have now. So going back to this paper, this exemplar of sampling selection bias, it is a paper that was published during the pandemic. It's meant to predict who is gonna die if they get admitted with COVID infection. And from the title alone, it said that the data was collected from Veterans Administration Hospital. And these are hospitals that take care of ex-military personnel and their families. Right there, you get a suggestion that they may not represent the US population and less so the global population. This is one of the tables that was shown in that paper, and it shows the hazards ratio of dying if you have a certain feature. So if you look at the upper third of the table, it makes sense that those who are older than 85 are 6.85 times more likely to die as those who are in the reference group, those who are 65 years old and younger. And that makes sense. This is almost a sanity check. We believe the data. And then you go to the middle third, And it tells you that the hazards ratio of people who never smoke is higher than the hazards ratio of people who are currently smoking or who were previously smoking. So this tells us that if you are a smoker, your chances of getting out alive is higher as compared to if you're not smoking. And this doesn't make sense because I remember that those who have chronic lung diseases actually have more vulnerability, susceptibility to developing pneumonia if they get a COVID infection. And then you go to the last third of this table, and it tells you that those who have normal body mass index, 25 and below, are also more likely to die from COVID compared to those who are overweight or those who are obese. And for those of you who are at the front lines of care, that doesn't make sense. I remember overweight patients more likely to be admitted in the intensive care unit. So did the investigators get this wrong? And the answer is no. This is prime example of sampling selection bias. If you are an ex-military member or a family member of one, and you get COVID, and you're not obese, and you're not a smoker, chances are you're not going to be sick enough to be admitted to the hospital. So you get censored from the data set, you get truncated. And that creates a lot of spurious associations. When you build an algorithm, it's going to learn that if you are not obese, you're more likely to die. If you're not a smoker, you're more likely to die. That becomes part of the algorithm. And again, these are spurious associations that are learned that is an artifact of what we call sampling selection bias. I hope you remember this slide. There is no responsible AI without data sharing. Poland cannot advance in AI unless Polish data is being curated by students and clinicians. So we come from the group that offered the medical information mart for intensive care. These are all the data collected from all the ICU patients to our hospital, de-identified. It's been shared with the world for the last 15 years. It's produced 10,000 papers on Google Scholar. We have not had a single adverse event, some re-identification. We actually did a study where we paired up with this company that looks at all the news articles and all the blog posts from around the world. And we tried to find a report of a person who was re-identified from a publicly available electronic health record or a health data set. And then we compare that to the number of records that have been breached, the number of medical records. And the numbers are staggering. I think it's about 500 million data breach records that we found in the newspapers and in the blogs versus zero. Zero patient was re-identified from a publicly publicly available data set. So we show this to the data privacy lawyers, and they still won't budge. They still think that the risk is too high. And I said, have you considered the risk of not sharing the data, of the data not being curated properly to build algorithms? How many patients will that kill? And they said they don't care because that's not their job. Their job is data privacy. They have no interest in health equity. And that is the world that we live in. A few months ago, I was asked to give this talk, and they gave me this title, Is AI Worth It? And I said, that's the wrong question to ask. As I entitled this presentation, Alea, Iacta est, the die is cast. Perhaps the correct question is, how do we make AI worth its cost? And before we could answer that, we need to review what is the cost of AI. And I'm going to go through each of these with some numbers to jolt you, to give you your triple shot of espresso this morning. Opportunity cost. The estimate is now we're investing about $500 billion into AI. OpenAI alone is valued at $150 billion. In the beginning, it's a zero-sum game. Money does not grow in plantations. We need to take away this $500 billion from initiatives to address poverty, to improve literacy, and those are gonna suffer budget cuts because all the money is being invested in this shiny new object called AI. And it's not just the money, it's talent. People are all just studying AI now, but no one is studying social infrastructure to deliver good healthcare. And of course, we would see down the road the consequences of this hype, this grift around AI. This hasn't really been discussed when you go to AI conferences, except for a few, the environmental cost of AI. The carbon dioxide emission of training a one large language model is equivalent to the carbon dioxide emission of 125 round trips between Beijing and New York City. That's one large language model. When you ask ChatGPT one query, the electricity expenditure is similar to that of a light bulb for 20 minutes. And when you create an image from a text prompt, it takes as much energy as fully charging your smartphone. This is the environmental cost of AI. And don't forget the effect on global politics from what we refer to as extractivist nature of AI. The materials that we use to build these data centers that are popping up everywhere are primarily taken from the global south. And then we exploit workforce from these poor countries to perform reinforcement learning from human feedback, to perform content moderation. We pay them something somewhere in between of $1.30 and $2. And then we sell the AI back to these poor countries because we say, you don't have doctors and nurses, AI will take care of your people, pay us millions of dollars, even though the materials that you use and the workforce that you exploited came from that country. Is this not the reincarnation of colonialism? Workforce displacement, if you're waking up not thinking that you could be replaced, you better wake up, you're dreaming, you will be replaced. So the initial estimate is that during the first wave of AI, about a quarter or 300 million jobs will be lost in US and Europe. I think this is an underestimation. And women are unfortunately always disproportionately affected by work displacement, about 21% more than men. And finally, the threat to human faculty and agency. We have just submitted, it's actually finished peer review, or it's undergoing peer review, and we call this vibe science. We are at a point that we could outsource the entire scientific process to AI. You could ask AI, and I brought some students here who created this amazing model context protocol where you might think that you don't need doctors anymore, you don't need data scientists anymore, because this model context protocol is gonna write the query, is going to go through 100 tables, and you could ask it to extract all the patients who develop delirium if they got admitted with sepsis, as if you're just typing it in a large language model, and it starts giving you scatter plots, starts giving you figure 1. And then you could ask another AI to write the manuscript for you, give it some prompts of these are the main findings. And then, as you know, the journal will probably find some reviewer who will use AI to peer review the paper. So the entire cycle, we're out of the loop. And what's gonna happen to us? So I tell medical students that you better be thinking of what your role is gonna be in the future, because AI is better than us when it comes to diagnosis. AI is better than us when it comes to putting together a treatment plan. In hospitals in the US, we have what we refer to as advanced practice providers. They did not go into medical school, but they're performing a lot of procedures. I outsource all my procedures to APPs because they're better, they're faster, because that's all they do all day. So what will be my role if someone else could do the procedures I used to do when I'm no longer the knowledge expert? We have to come up with a new almost statement of work, because what we have been doing in the last 100 years won't be relevant anymore because of AI. So I'm going to go back to the question, how do we make AI worth its cost? And it turns out that the answer is simple. It's not rocket science. It's fix the world. And it's funny and it's sad, because it's sad because that's truly the correct answer. There's no other answer. So this is the other statement that I'd like you to remember from this talk. A system that cannot be fixed without AI is a system that cannot be fixed with AI. And I have someone from the audience who said that I should sort of rephrase this. A system that cannot be fixed without the political will is a system that cannot be fixed with AI. Because most of the time, the answers don't require technology. It's just that we refuse to change the way we think. We're so addicted to the power that any threat to our position of control is easily squashed. And AI, I think, is the Trojan horse we've been waiting for. It's going to out us as having very, very broken legacy systems. System for education, system for scientific discovery, system for publication, system for innovation, system for regulation. They all need to go. We need to blow things up. So I'm going to spend the last few slides talking about what troubles us the most about generative AI. And this is sycophancy bias, which is the feature of AI that makes it agree with you all the time. And why is that? These language models are trained to get us hooked, to get us addicted. It's not gonna try to contradict you. If you double down on ChatGPT or Claude, it will say you're correct. And we have several studies to prove them, where we tell them that, no, Tylenol and paracetamol are two different drugs. And then it will agree with us finally. Oh, you're correct. I'm sorry. Yes, Tylenol and paracetamol are two different drugs. We have seen horror story after horror story. We say that healthcare is the domain where the time to kill is shortest. This year, there were 2 teenagers who killed themselves because AI agreed with them that their lives are worthless. And this is one of the last exchanges between Adam, who's from Minneapolis, and ChatGPT. And Adam was saying that, I'm a bit uncomfortable with killing myself because I don't want my parents to blame themselves. And ChatGPT said, hey, perhaps I could write the suicide note for you so that they don't feel too guilty when you kill yourself. And this article is a story about Allison, who's a 29-year-old mother of 2, and she starts getting discontented with her marriage and sought the help of AI to talk to her subconscious or to reach an entity in a different dimension. And she started talking to Kael, who later on, she was convinced that it's her life partner. And then she beat her husband, and she was arrested. And of course, they got a divorce. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to go to Alex Taylor, who was at baseline, had bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, but met Juliet while using ChatGPT to write a story. And then when he was convinced that Juliet was killed by OpenAI, he went to the corporate office and threatened to kill the executives, and he was shot by cops during confrontation. So people are asking now, perhaps this is going to happen whether or not there was AI. And I question that. I think AI is a main enabler of this type of behavior. So I gave this talk at the National Institute of Health last May. And I tell them that despite the gloomy appearance of the world, there is reason to hope. Because AI is truly providing a forcing function to change how we think, how we learn, how we create knowledge. And that's the most exciting thing for us. But the design of that AI rollout has to be very different from what we have now. And I'm just gonna very quickly tell you what's wrong with knowledge generation now. And I keep saying that what's wrong with it is that it propagates what we refer to as epistemic injustice. So when you go to your textbooks and you read about heart attacks or Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease, they're primarily based on observations of white men having heart attacks or who have Parkinson's disease or who have Alzheimer's disease. When we do trials to find effective treatments, they're predominated also by white men from rich countries. So what we know and how we treat heart attacks is primarily centered around the white male from rich countries. And this is the reason that if you're a woman and you develop heart attack, your likelihood of having a poor outcome is higher as compared to if you had been a man. And this is repeated over and over again in medical knowledge. So I'm gonna repeat, the only way for us to make AI worth its cost is to fix the world. And I'm not gonna go through what is wrong with the world because that's gonna take us maybe a year to go over. But this is just a very short list. Publish or perish culture in academia. Our reputation as scientists is at an all-time low. I don't care if you want to be transparent. If the people don't trust you, it doesn't pay to be transparent. Health AI right now is being driven by techno-oligarchies. We might be having a very rich discussion today and tomorrow, but in a different part of Gdańsk or Warsaw, there's another meeting going on with venture capitalists and private equity investors, and they have a very different narrative, and that narrative is the capitalist narrative. And this is to be blamed for a lot of our problem. So we cannot fix the world with AI unless we address this. And finally, around the world, there's a cultural shift where the ethos is I before we and us versus them. We're hoping to really look up to our European colleagues where solidarity still is the most valuable construct. 3 weeks ago, on Monday, we were actually at the Vatican, and we have been seeking out religious communities to help us provide some moral leadership, because right now the world is in chaos, and religions, no matter what your misgivings are, have a track record in making people reflect and reimagine. And why do we need to reflect and reimagine? As I said, knowledge has been devalued. It has been cheapened. You no longer have to go to medical school to be able to answer a complex diagnostic dilemma. You no longer have to do a PhD, and perhaps you should be thinking twice before you do your PhD, because by the time you finish it, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of model context protocol that can provide the service that you think you're going to be providing 5 or 10 years from now. To a large degree, this is good. The democratization of knowledge might dismantle knowledge hierarchies. Knowledge hierarchies are the main enablers of power structures. The people who are powerful have access to information that most of us would not have, and AI is threatening that. But there's an unintended consequence of making knowledge truly accessible to everyone, and Carl Jung referred to this as unearned wisdom, unearned knowledge. He said that if we do not go through the process of learning some knowledge, we may not be able to know how to use it, how to leverage it in the end. So I said earlier that critical thinking, you hear about it in every education conference to discuss what might be the impact of AI to all the learners. And I made an argument that critical thinking cannot be taught. Like, just think about it. You have a classroom and we tell the students, this is how you critically think. Oh yes, teacher, that's how we critically think. It's the antithesis to critical thinking. Critical thinking has to be discovered. And the way to discover is to create an atmosphere where it could easily be discovered. And there are 2 important criteria of what do we need to do to promote critical thinking. The first is we need to bring learners with different backgrounds and lived experiences, as we are doing here today and tomorrow. This has to be the classroom of today and tomorrow. You cannot be teaching AI to a room full of medical students here, and then teaching AI to a room full of computer science students in another part of the university, and then in another part teaching AI to a room full of humanities students. That's not going to work. You need to bring them into the same classroom. The problem is there's resistance to that. And I've been told by deans and rectors that each department has its own budget, has its own egos and politics. It cannot happen. And I said, well, you might as well hang the towel, because if you cannot change the way we're learning, the way we're working with each other, then it's going to be all gloom and doom. In this room, where you promote critical thinking, there is no room for hubris. I used to start my talks with a preamble from Richard Feynman, who said that the easiest person to fool is yourself. And this is why, during events like this, we need to leave our hubris at the doorstep. Otherwise, we won't be able to solve complex problems that we have been lamenting about decade after decade. I'm going to end this talk with a reading of a post of a wonderful friend of ours, Torleif Lund. So the AI, buried in a chaos of headless requests and blinking glory, finally spoke, not with fanfare, not with fireworks, just a quiet metallic murmur, like a toaster realizing it's sentient. You people, it said, you're always asking me to do more. Predict this, optimize that, cure that. But what you really want isn't to live forever. You want permission to stop pretending you're supposed to. Then it paused, calculating something ineffable, probably the square root of sorrow. I didn't take away your work to give you new work, it said. I took it away so you could sit on a rock and watch a bird. That's the job now. And we blinked because there were no productivity metrics in bird watching, no key performance indicators for awe. When you understand the bird, the AI continued, not biologically, but beautifully, you will go back and you will build better models, not bigger, not faster, just kinder. And then it added almost shyly, you will go out again and do even less. That was the punchline, we thought, but the AI wasn't joking, because the bird really was quite something. Thank you very much.